What's up, my fellow alt-rock scene music lovers? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review podcast. Matrix Music Review on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find me any of those places at Matrix Music Review. You can also find me over at YouTube at Matrix Music Review. It has been a minute since I dropped some stuff for you guys, and it's been about 5 months at this point since I've been on here and dropped some new podcasts and everything else. So today's episode is going to be very simple. I'm going to go through what the hell has been going on, why I haven't been around, and then I'm going to do a Warped Tour recap. It's kind of perfect timing to talk about how my experience was at Warped Tour DC right before we get into, or right after, this will drop after Warped Tour Long Beach. But I just wanted to get on here and give you guys an update of what's going on, in that I will be back. This is my return to form, I guess you could say. And yeah, let's just jump into it. So I released 2 podcasts at the beginning of this year, and it was one of those situations where life got in the way. You know, work became a thing. My day job became a thing that was kind of crazy. And then I ended up having some health problems, ended up having, some issues with that. And then was just going to shows, trying to keep up with those. Ended up switching jobs and all of this other fun stuff. And it was just one of those situations where I had reviews written and I just never found the time to sit and record. I actually have 2 podcasts recorded with reviews that I'm going to try to just release at some point so that you guys have them. But it was just something where I kind of had to take a step back and look at what was going to be the most productive way to continue doing this podcast, what's going to be the most productive way to get content out to you guys. And what I decided was, since I had been gone for so long, and since I had missed so many reviews, it was not worth it to try to put out full reviews for all of these albums, try to get, full things done. What I'm going to do instead is, obviously I mentioned today we're going to talk about my Warped Tour experience and, good, bad, the ugly. You guys know I'm going to tell you like it is and tell you what it's going to be. And then the next episode you get from me is actually going to be the mid-year drop. So on that mid-year list and mid-year, how the scene has been so far, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about, like I always do, what my top albums are, top EPs, artists that are having a good year, what I'm looking forward to in the next part of the year. Then what's going to happen is there's going to be a little bit of a break. I might release those 2 podcasts that I have kind of in the can at this point. Because I'm going to be on a vacation and I have to do one more little training thing for work. But basically what's going to happen now is we're going to be back on track. And new job opens me up to being able to do this a little bit more often, which is great, and being able to do more, content-wise. And that's really what I was looking for, is to be able to do this more. I have had an incredible year show-wise and an incredible year networking-wise with artists and with fans and everything else. So it just seemed like a logical thing to kind of stop for a little bit, reimagine this podcast a little bit, reimagine the, the intros and all of the other stuff like that, I was trying to nail and try and be perfect. And you know what? Fuck it. We ain't going to be perfect. We're going to just go through it together, and you guys have been supporting regardless. So that's why I've been going. That's where we're going. That's what we're doing. Hopefully you guys aren't too upset that you haven't had stuff in a while, but the playlist has been being updated. It's going to get updated again right before I go on vacation so that you guys have some more new tunes on there. And yeah, let's jump right into Warped Tour. So Warped Tour was about a month ago at this point, Warped Tour DC. And I don't love to do immediate reactions to Warped Tour because I feel like sometimes you have to let it sink in. And especially this year with how fucking hot it was not worth it to try and do a follow-up right after that weekend. So let's start out with the good. I think the good was they definitely took some suggestions from last year and spun it into the right way. The wristbanding system was much better in terms of, ease of entry, which there is a con to that, and we'll talk about that a little later. But the wristbands were definitely a home run. I think that was a very smart decision. I think being able to preload your credit card onto your wristband was another really big added bonus, so that you're not trying to swap cards in and out all fucking day or grab your phone out. It was definitely something for me that I thought was helpful. The other good was, in a sense, we didn't get any rain this year. And while I think all of us would have agreed if you attended Warp DC that some rain would have been very nice to kind of cool everybody off a little bit, I still think that rain can make for a problematic experience, especially when, Sunday night they were calling for thunderstorms and things like that. That could have really messed things up. I think, again, food options were relatively decent. I didn't have any issues with food. I didn't have any issues with travel. I took the metro in and out, and I never once had a problem grabbing a metro or getting to and from places. Even, at the end of the second night when everybody's trying to file into the metro, I feel like I ended up staying kind of in the opposite direction, so it worked out. But all in all, I had a good experience with it. I think, the bands that I saw were great. We'll talk about those bands in a little bit. We'll talk about the bands kind of at the end. We'll do an overview of that. So let's get into what didn't work, because I think there were a couple of things, not only that I saw, but I know that a lot of other people were definitely complaining about. And I think it's kind of overwhelming at this point what the vibe needs to be for next year, because as we already know, they've already released tickets for next year, no lineup, none of that stuff. But one of the biggest problems was entry on Saturday. Now, you heard me say at the very beginning that entry was kind of smooth with wristbanding, which it was. However, on Saturday, it was an absolute clusterfuck. It was a sea of about 4,000 people, at least from what I could gather, all clustered into one area. It was hot. People were dropping. And I think a lot of it had to do with the poor stationing of drink wristbands. If you've never been to Warped Tour DC, basically the way it starts is you get to the ticketing checkpoint, you scan your wristband to get in, then you go through about another 20 or 30 feet until you get to the security line where they check your bags, you go through the metal detector, all that bullshit. And then once you get through that, you're technically on the festival grounds. But the festival grounds has a drink station right there to the left, and right in front of that drink station is where the people are standing to be able to check IDs and give you the 21 plus wristband. So what ended up happening was you'd get through the ticket check, and then you'd have to wait at security even though people were done, because there was a backup for people checking IDs. And then once the IDs were checked, people were obviously, drenched and needing of hydration because you can't carry anything in. And they're going straight to the drink station to either get a water or alcohol or whatever it may be. And it's just causing just this congestion that really wasn't necessary. And so I think that was a problem that they need to look into for next year. But funny enough, when you looked at Sunday, it was a completely different story. They had it fenced off. You walked in like basically a single file line till you got to the front where you scanned your tickets in. I was in that venue in about 15 minutes after I walked to the front, maybe even less than that. Whereas on Saturday, we got to the festival grounds around like 11:15, and I was not physically in the festival grounds walking towards a stage until about 12:30. And that was really disappointing because there were a few bands that I wanted to check out early and, didn't have this problem last year, didn't have any issues with this last year. And now all of a sudden, I'm waiting in line for an hour and 15 minutes to just walk through the door and I've already missed 2 or 3 bands that I wanted to see. So that was a little disappointing. That was a little upsetting for me, but I think that's something that they got to look at and they got to work on for next year. One of the other issues that I think came up was obviously the lack of shade and the lack of seating. Now, I realize that we are at a festival. I realize that we are, not going to have a ton of seated options, but there is plenty of space in that festival grounds to put up a couple more tents with seats, put up a couple of more shaded areas, or even just canopies or whatever it is. I mean, people were dropping left and right on Saturday. It was really, really bad. And I think when you look at something like that, it doesn't just detract from their experience, it detracts from everybody's experience around them, because this scene is one of the nicest scenes, I will tell you, I've ever seen. If somebody drops, everybody around you is trying to help you. And, if you fall down or you go down in the middle of a story of the year pit, everybody's going to stop and try to help you, but that doesn't mean that story of the year necessarily is going to stop. And I'm just using them as an example. This isn't something that happened, but bands are trying to do what they got to do, and they can't always see everything. So they're not necessarily going to stop just because something happens in the crowd. And it's really hard. It's a hard thing. So I think there needs to be some more consideration, especially when you do these types of festivals in the heat of June, or, obviously over in Long Beach in the heat of July. There's got to be more consideration for at least easier ways to cool off without having to spend the VIP money for, air-conditioned bathrooms where I guess you could sit for 5 or 10 minutes. The other thing that I think will be an improvement for next year, because they've already done it, and I think this is something that we, as people of DC, will tell you we are very frustrated by, is the decision for Long Beach at least give a day-by-day breakdown of what bands are playing on what day. I think that is something that needs to happen for DC next year. It needs to happen moving forward, because at this point, everybody that's paying for a ticket obviously realizes that there's going to be overlap. There's going to be bands that they may not be able to see. But on a day like Saturday of DC Warped, where it was super hot, if a person is not there to see the headliners of like Rise Against or bands that are playing later, that's a great time to be able to go back and recharge and say, hey, you know what? I am a big fan of Yellowcard, who's the headliner on Sunday. I'm going to get myself a couple extra hours of rest, rehydrate, and do all that other shit. And then that way I can be back here early to see who I want to see. So I think now seeing that Long Beach is doing that, and I know a lot of people say, yo, it's just a cash grab. Like, they're just trying to sell single day tickets. They didn't sell enough. Whatever. Bottom line is, even if it is a cash grab, it improves things for us next year, and it makes things a little bit easier for people moving forward. So if it is a cash grab, whatever, just take it as a benefit for us in the future and move on. The other benefit that I saw come through was for ticketing for next year, they're adding a GA Plus option where you basically have access to those air-conditioned bathrooms. It's an interesting thing. I mean, I think a lot of people will say that I think it's like an extra $10 per ticket is probably worth it based off of this year's experience. But how do you control it? How do you say that, yeah, this is an okay thing to do? How do you do whatever? I mean, it's sure as shit better than paying an extra $130 for VIP just to be able to do those things. So it'll be an interesting thing to see. Overall, my experience was really solid again. And it was solid because of the bands and the artist interactions that I had. And that's kind of how I'm going to end this podcast, is talking about some of the experiences that I had, some of the people I got to meet, and just kind of what the essence of Warped Tour coming back has been so far. And I think it's really, really cool to see artists that have been here and done that, and artists that are just getting a chance to do this, how they've responded to Warped Tour. So I felt like this year at DC, the lineup definitely lended itself to being a little bit more on the nostalgic side, whereas last year I feel like we had a little bit better of a mix. But either way, I was able to meet up and talk with Travis, and I was able to meet up with Tilly, and able to meet up and talk with Lolo. And some of those were designated meet and greets, but some of them weren't. Some of them were just like, yo, I'm at my table and we're just going to talk. And that was really cool. Those specifically, Travis and Lolo, have been huge supporters of mine throughout the years. And it's kind of a full circle moment for me to be able to not only see them and thank them, but just kind of, hear some of the stories that they have to tell, and, hear that they're appreciative of all the things that I do. And that's the really cool thing about what I do. What I do is I try to, boost people up and show artists to other people that may not be even on their radar yet. And that's the really cool thing about this. And, I think nobody was happier than Travis when we were able to talk. I mean, we've been talking for 3 years at this point. Obviously he's over in Cali, I'm over here on the East Coast. So, to get a chance to be able to link up and, have those conversations and talk about what's next for all of us, I think that's really cool. And I don't think anybody had a wilder Warp DC experience than Lolo. I mean, if you follow her on Instagram, you know that there was nothing but hell trying to get to Warp Tour with flight cancellations and luggage and all that other shit. So to be able to go through all that, get to your stage, put on a hell of a show, and then be as nice as could be with fans after the fact, I don't think that there's enough words to describe how cool that was to see. A lot of artists would have just said, fuck this, I just had a shit day. As much as I want to go see fans, I'm done, I'm getting the hell out of here. But that was not the case. Stayed and hung out for at least an hour, if not longer, with fans. And that's how you build a fan base. That's how you build a really strong following. And that's how you make a name for yourself. So props to Lolo on that. And as far as bands and experiences that I enjoyed, I loved being able to see some of my all-time favorites in one spot. Being able to say that I got to see Story So Far, Hot Mulligan, New Found Glory, MXPX, Yellowcard, all at the same place, all at the same time, that was beyond what I could have imagined. I think it's also really cool to see that there is so much love for some of these, what I would consider like scene legends or giants, that, for example, I was wandering around and I can't remember what set it was, but Ryan and the rest of the home team were out just kind of like chilling in the pit, listening to a band on the small stages. Like, you don't get those experiences anywhere else. Like, even if you're at a big festival, shit like that doesn't happen, where bands are just out in the crowd and nobody's bugging them, nobody's fucking with them. Like, we're all just listening to the music together as fans. And that's what's really cool about this, is that the artists are fans too. And they're not just fans of one band, they're fans of everybody. So it's not uncommon to see somebody at the front of the Story So Far set or in the pit with everybody during that. So I think for me, that's what I always go back to when people complain and say, well, oh, Warped Tour is not the same, whatever. Of course it's not. But take it for what it is. It is a good opportunity to see a lot of different bands for a relatively decent price. I mean, $130 for a 2-day pass isn't all that bad. Think about what you'd pay to go see, a large tour in an amphitheater setting, right? Like, if you're going with somebody you're probably paying at least $80, $90 a ticket. So, and you're only getting 4 bands. So for an extra $50 per ticket, you can see upwards of 90 all in one spot. That seems like a pretty good trade-off to me, but I get it, and I get where people have had problems with this festival, and I will be very interested to see what happens with DC moving forward. Obviously, I will be going again next year. I can't not go. It's a great experience. It's a great marketing, opportunity for me, not only for me with artists, but me with fans as well. And that festival space isn't going to be there much longer. That's the site of new construction. And once it leaves that festival space, I wonder if it'll be in DC somewhere else or if they're going to have to move it. And I think for me, that's what I always keep going back to is we have something that we've bitched and moaned about needing it to come back. Now that it's back, we're complaining again about what it is. And we have a very short amount of time for it to potentially be in this location. So let's live it up while we have the opportunity. Let's take advantage of it while it's in that spot. And let's just do it. If I can make one suggestion to Kevin Lyman for next year is to, again, just add more of the newer, younger bands in the scene. Keep what you're doing with some of the, stalwarts in the scene. You got to keep them there, but also make sure that you're balancing that out. Make sure that, there are a bunch more of those younger bands. And my biggest thing is don't just throw them all on the back small stages. A band like Honey Revenge played the back small stage again. They've graduated from there. They need to be on the mid-size stage. Same thing with a band like the Early November. Putting them on the backstage at the same time as Yellowcard. Obviously, the Early November is not necessarily a newer, younger band, but we need to be a little bit smarter about where we're putting some of these bands because, unfortunately, the smaller stages, it was a much better setup this year, I will say that. But the smaller stages with those types of bands fill up in a way that makes Artist Alley overwhelmed, and it really diminishes what Artist Alley can do, and it also diminishes the Nitro Circus guys as well if they're around there at the same time as one of those bands. So, as far as festival setup, I think everything was much better this year, but that's just my one suggestion is a little bit more balance in terms of the acts that are going to be there and a little bit more attention to where bands are going to be playing in terms of stages and trying to, make that a little bit easier for everybody involved. That wraps it up for the Warped Tour review. I hope everybody enjoyed. I hope you're glad that we're back. I know I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be back talking about music, happy to be back talking about this scene, especially after some of the experiences that I've had this year. It's been really cool to, have some of those interactions and see some of these artists and share some of this stuff. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, at Matrix Music Review on all social media platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, all of the places. That's where you can follow me. Leave a review, leave a comment, let me know how everything's going. If there's music that you think I haven't checked out, send that over. I will be more than happy to check that out, add it to the playlist, whatever it is. And I will see you guys very soon with the mid-year podcast list. I am very excited for it. It has been an interesting year for music, and we'll talk about that as well. So I will see you guys next time.